A re-record of chapter 8. Last time I did this recording, I actually had some bronchitis and it didn't go so well, but I had to do it for my students for my current course that I was teaching at the time. So this should be a little bit more clear. It might sound a little different than the original one, but it's the aspect of what we're talking about and the concepts don't really change. So remember, this is for the National Academy of Sports Medicine, NASM's certified personal training exam. So this is something that is a tool. It's not going to be things that are going to be verbatim directly on the initial testing. So a lot of these concepts should apply, and they will definitely help you to understand like the terminology and everything like that. So for chapter 8 here for cardiorespiratory fitness, it's going to be a very important section for the exam. It's definitely something that you definitely want to pay attention to as you go through. So it's not one of those chapters that you want to just dismiss completely and be like, oh, I know all about this stuff, because there are specific concepts that relate to, exercise that if you're not coming from an exercise background, that can ultimately help you. So let's kind of roll with it here and go through. So cardiorespiratory fitness, really, I mean, the bottom line here is, what is it doing? It's basically taking blood in our system. So there's your cardio component. It's taking that cardio component and so with your heart and combining it with the lungs. So it's the interaction of circulating basically oxygenated blood, or as it says here, and this is oxygenated, oxygen rich, same terminology, oxygen rich blood, so that it can get to the working muscles. It can then supply them with the needed energy via carbohydrate, via fat, via protein, whatever it is that you're trying to do. Because it's cardio, we know that you have the ability to burn carbs, fats, and proteins very efficiently, and the body just understands how to do that very effectively so that you can continue the work. Because remember, it's cardio, it's going to be longer duration versus the intensity component of it. All right, so what is it? So to kind of say it one more time again, cardiorespiratory fitness is the ability to take oxygen rich blood and circulate it through the body via the pump of our body, which is the heart. So, and it'll be released to the rest of the body to then be used to supply the working muscles with the energy that it needs and the fuel that it needs to supply the energy, so that you can then move as fast or as slow as you need to go. All right, like it says here, cardiorespiratory fitness is, it's important for health and wellness in general, because you got to be able to work on this term right here. Now, it's probably come up before in your look, but when the highlighted terminology here, activities of daily living, your ADLs, things that, even in not even, but things that an elderly person still needs to have to keep their independence going for them. Okay. So in terms of this whole aspect of integrated training and using multiple modalities to create this well-rounded approach to exercise, this is going to be a way that you can show progression for your clients systematically. All right, meaning that you have a specific set of operations that are going to take you from one step to the next, and then it's going to progress you through those stages, so that you can always move through those stages once you progress the body accordingly, because you can be in that stage 1, 2, or 3, and from those stages you basically you're able to use them as they've progressed to level 3, that you can use them interchangeably. You can do level 1 base, which is more like steady state cardio. All right, so and then you can move through and go back to stage 3, which is more like interval training, longer duration interval training. So by doing this and placing those stressors on the body, it's going to elevate the person to the next level. Okay. I will say though that lack of cardio or lack of cardiorespiratory fitness is going to be very hurtful for the body. Your body can't function effectively even during rest. All right. So the health benefits there are immense. Now, in the long run, lacking cardio for a longer period of time is only going to lead to, which no one ever wants to hear the word, mortality or death. And that really can become a train wreck as we start moving through. So what are we looking at in terms of our progression? Okay. That systematic approach to each session. Well, we're looking for a warm up phase. We're looking for a conditioning phase, which is the main component of what we're talking about. Fortunately for you, there are many different types of it, so we'll break those down as we get through, but also understanding that there is this conditioning phase. There's this phase where you're going to be doing the work. And then of course there's the cool down phase to get the body to come back to homeostasis or get as close to resting as possible. Okay? So that's what we're looking for. That's the phases that really take us through. And that's pretty consistent for speed, agility, and quickness, for resistance training, whatever it is. You always have those warm ups and those cool downs, and then you have that midsection for where you're actually doing the work. So with your warm up, there's a general and there's a specific. Very simply put, general is just movement patterns that get the body to start to become activated. Okay. It's any movement that doesn't have a specific mechanism for it, meaning that you're just kind of doing some like arm circles. I know that we're not going to be running a 5K on our hands, you know? So that's one of the aspects that we can really work with is, you know, a general arm circles are a general style of warm up. Okay. They get the shoulders to be able to become more moving. Okay. Specific is those that actually mimic the actual movements that you're going to do. So for cardio based, you know, you think about it, just say that you're going for a run. I mean, you could start, you know, not that it's, you can ease into a run by slow, light jogging, but if you want to get some functional movement in there, some specific functions, then doing walking lunges or, you know, are very specific to what you're trying to do. Doing um, I call them Frankensteins, but basically, you know, like hind leg kicks, trying to hit your foot to your toe, and those style of things are going to help for getting your hip flexors to become more engaged, and we need those for the propulsion of the run. So it's what is more specific to what you're trying to achieve. Okay, so that's you know, so we need general, we need specific, but also in there too, we need things like we need our you know, do we need dynamic stretching? Do we need static stretching? Do we need self myofascial release or myofascial release? So SMR or MFR, depending upon which way you want to put it. Foam rolling is another, you know, cliche kind of a term for it, but you can do so much more than just foam rolling. You can use different types of balls. You can use kettlebells. You can use medicine balls. They all can help with releasing of tension as we get going through. Okay. So, you know, what are the benefits there? It's pretty straightforward. All right. We're trying to increase our heart and our respiratory rate so that we can then have our body start to adapt to those higher levels. Now, we're not going to be doing max effort here, but you get the premise that you know, unless you're a marathon runner, you know, you're going to have, you know, even marathon runners have high heart rates as they work, but their body is able to maintain that. Now, with a general person, they're going to have this increases because they're going to be fluctuating in and out of these higher and lower intensity rates because they can't maintain it as well as an elite level marathon runner. So what we're trying to do either way is we're trying to get the heart to start pumping a little bit more blood to the rest of the body because it's going to need that extra blood flow to supply oxygen, to supply nutrients to keep us moving. And then we want to be able to breathe a little bit more. Well, we don't want to have hyperventilation, you know, excessive breathing, but we want to have a higher respiratory rate simply because of the fact that you need to bring in more outside air, which holds a lot of oxygen to be able to get it to the internal components of our body. You want to increase tissue temperature. So whether, you know, for the major function of this chapter, we're talking about tissue temperature for skeletal working muscles. And then psychologically, it gets you ready for it. You know, you start to go from just thinking general thoughts to when you're in the warm up. Now you're starting to think about the plan that you have for the attack of the workout that you're going to do. All right. So really, 5 to 10 minutes. You know, that's really what it should be about. You know, you may find people that do excessively long warm ups, and sometimes it's just really not needed. So 5 to 10 minutes is adequate enough for you to be able to get working, get moving before you start to do your conditioning component of everything. All right. Now, we talked about self myofascial release here. All right. And there's different things that you can do in that interim. But again, when we're doing things like self-myofascial release, it needs to be specific to the areas that we're going to be working. If you're going to be doing a long duration row, well, you're probably going to want to do more of a total body approach. So you should be, you should be foam rolling or releasing using different techniques. The lats, the upper part around the shoulder blades, so the lower and the mid traps, things like that. All right, and on top of that, because I said total body, you're going to also want to do the hip flexors. You're going to need your calves. You're going to need, glutes and hamstrings, because it is a row is technically, a rowing machine is technically a whole body approach, because you are using legs, centralized core musculature, and then also the upper body as well. All right. Also, for the stabilization level, which is the lower level that and I don't want to use lower as a negative word, but the lower level of work, and that's for individuals trying to maintain core stabilization. We're going to want them to work in that static stretching, because we're trying to work on stabilization of everything. So that's only going to help. So static stretching here. As you start to up your level of ability, then that's where we're going to want to change the static to dynamic. So if we go down, you can see here, then you're going to look at your cardio exercises here. Now, for a cardio routine, 5 to 10 minutes, that could just be 5 to 10 minutes of light motion as we get ready to go. Okay, it could be that you're doing, maybe you're doing a 3-mile run. Well, you might be walking on that treadmill for a few minutes before you get into the run. Okay, but this is where I was going with what I wanted to say here. So as we scroll through, static stretching for somebody in the stabilization level. As you move to the strength level, there we go. We start getting into more, as we call it, active isolated stretching. All right, and that if you have a question on that, I would suggest going back and looking at the flexibility information so that you understand what active isolated stretching is. But that's a little bit more specific to what you're trying to achieve. All right, and see, there's still your self-myofascial release. There's your cardio warm-up before you get into it. And then as you progress here, truly active, isolated, from the strength level. Then as you move to the power level, it's really more about self-myofascial release and dynamic. Now, dynamic stretching does not mean it's for the best movers. It's for the most elite of athletes. No, everybody can do dynamic stretching. It's just that we have the ability to work in different levels within the NASM curriculum. And this is one of the ways that with power output, dynamic is going to be very particular for that, because it really gets the body moving versus just kind of staying more isolated to specific areas. Okay, so we've kind of shown you a few warm-up examples. Obviously, it's going to be more specific to your clientele for what you're having them do. Okay, so then we move on to the conditioning phase. Well, what are we really trying to achieve with this conditioning phase? Well, we're trying to make our heart more efficient. We're trying to make it stronger, meaning that, okay, so in terms of stronger, we want to basically allow the heart to be a very strong pump. So if we can increase the size of the fibers that make up the cardiac muscle, that's hypertrophy. Okay, that's really good. Having thicker or bigger heart wall musculature is really good. Now, if you ever hear hypertrophy of the heart and you're like, well, I was told that hypertrophy of the heart can be bad. Well, that is true as well. So let's clarify that here. Stronger and larger, well, the larger the muscle groups within the muscles within the heart means that they'll be stronger to propel blood. Now, your body can also have hypertrophy of the heart, meaning that it can, and it's usually around the left ventricle, and that's usually found in people who have any sort of cardiac condition, or what it a lot of times is found in more commonly is with people who have hypertension, because with hypertension, that means there's a higher pressure level in the left ventricle, not meaning that it's stronger. It just means that it has, when you have high blood pressure, that means the heart has to pump more and provide more pressure, because there's some sort of resistance in the body that makes it have to work more, which then increases the size of the left ventricle wall, not the whole heart like we're talking about here. but having a very strong and powerful heart, meaning that it can beat and send out a lot of blood at one time. It can then fill back up and beat more blood out at that next pump. Okay. So what we're saying here is that the blood pump per minute is this highlighted word right here, cardiac output. Blood pumped per beat is what we would call stroke volume, just so we can see the difference there. So cardiac output is stroke volume times heart rate, meaning that you are technically, every beat that you have times how many times your heart beats per minute will give you cardiac output. Okay, so the ability to pump blood is going to be improved. You'll also have a reduced risk of disease, okay, whether it be heart disease, whether so there's a lot of scare with that, because it's truly the high any cardiac disease or heart disease is truly, it is it's the greatest killer that we have in the United States, and a lot of that can be culminated through the lack of movement that we have, particularly cardiorespiratory fitness. There is a lower resting heart rate. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to always have a lower working heart rate, because we'll talk about that in the next little bullet here, but you're going to have a lower resting heart rate, meaning that at rest, your body just can pump and then hang out for a little bit and then pump again. Okay, and that's really what you're looking for. Now, the next one is a lower heart rate at any given level of work. Now, if you think about it, any given level of work, if you're trying to go for max effort and you're trying to really push hard, well, then we're talking about max effort. But what we're saying here is that if you're working at a lower percentage of the max heart rate that you have, that means that your body just doesn't have to work as hard. So if you are working at 80% of your heart rate max, well, at some point here, you can still do the same amount of work, but it may only be at 75% or 78%, which means that your heart is now working more efficiently and more effectively, and it's working so that you can do what you need to do at the right time. Okay, so that's where the benefits there really come into play. And then for the cool down part, yes, here we have, it's a good transition from working to then slowing down, trying to get back to rest or as close to homeostasis as possible. Now, post-workout, we are under the assumption that the body will keep its metabolism or metabolic rate elevated for a period after. Now, that period is always, there's a range that always occurs, could be 12 to 24 hours, depending upon how far or how hard you work. So that can be a major influencer. But really, a cool down is getting our body to be able to relax, even though our metabolic rate might still be churning. Okay, so what are we looking at here? What are the benefits? With a cool down, you're going to have improved flexibility. A lot of times, we're going to be taking the static stretching and the myofascial release that we do at the very end, and that's going to help us to not become as rigid as our muscles really want to be. You're also going to be able to remove waste byproducts. Now, waste byproducts can be anything from lactic acid to removal of, proteins that have been broken down via the work that you've been doing. It's going to be carbon dioxide that's going to be removed as the body starts to recover. You're going to use up some of the oxygen and break that down into the carbon dioxide that needs to be removed. So there's another part of the waste, so it's going to be there. With the improved flexibility component, and then going from, if you went from 0 to, or from 100 to 0, in terms just 100 miles an hour to 0 miles an hour stopped, you're not giving the body an ample chance to kind of recover. So therefore, the muscles in your system would want to tighten up. So going from start to to stopping is going to cause that havoc. So by cooling down, you can eliminate some of that soreness that can be there. Not all of it, but some of it. All right, and then that also helps when you're doing your stretching components. That's also going to help with the soreness as well. It allows, like it says here, it allows the cardiorespiratory system to respond to lower demands. Pretty straightforward. It can avoid, when you go from from a starting point to a stopping point very quickly. People who are not used to exercise, or people who may have specific conditions, could have that dizziness or fainting episode, seeing stars, things like that. And that can help by cooling down. You can avoid that from happening. And then it's an emotional balance. You basically went through the stresses of the workout, so emotionally you're saying woof, or you're saying some other words that we don't really want to talk about here, but you're saying something. And then internally your thought process is, do I really want to do this again? Or but when you go through that cool down period, you have that ability to kind of reflect on everything that you just did, and then say, okay, I was stressed, now I'm becoming less stressed, physically and emotionally. So therefore, I'm starting to feel better. And then I realized that, guess what? It really wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. Okay. So again, just like the warm up, the period of time is 5 to 10 minutes. But again, the warm up is 5 to 10 minutes. That's a rough number. Cool down 5 to 10 minutes. That's a rough number. Okay. So what are we looking for here? We're trying to get ourselves to come down nice and easy, so that we don't overexert ourselves in a resting period, which can cause complications. So we're trying to get back to a better state. So what do we can do some flexibility types of things, like it says here, corrective stretching. We talked about foam rolling, or using other implements to be able to apply pressure to a muscle to release some of the tension. And then post workout static stretching. One of the things that NASM really stresses is, it really stresses that they want to see a lot of that dynamic movement before, and then they want to see the static stretching at the end. Okay. Now I full on believe that that's a very important component of it. Now, it doesn't mean you can't static stretch before. It doesn't mean that you can't do some dynamic stuff after. It just means that we want to be a little bit more static post, because it can help with getting back to resting. We don't really want to use too much static pre-workout or in the warm-up part, because there has been some really good research that has shown that basically you're really having a diminished work or your workout session when you do a lot of static stretching beforehand. The muscles just do not respond as well to static stretching as they do with dynamic. All right, so just kind of put that in your back pocket as well. So, that's kind of the cool down, everything like that. So, with working out, why do we do it? I mean, well, most people talk about health benefits. A lot of people talk about improvements in weight management. Sometimes cardio might be the thing that keeps the weight off for a resistance trainer, and it keeps their weight management manageable, because they're doing cardio, which helps burn some additional calories during and then after training. All right, so there's a lot of different reasons why. Sometimes it's a mental thing. Sometimes people will just say, I need to go for a run to clear my mind. Again, there is a ton of research out there that says that working out is a de-stressor, and it can, even people with specific conditions, that with anxiety, people who have chronic stress, or things like that are commonplace in our society. Those individuals, they show that by going and doing cardio, whatever form of it that they choose to, running being one of the main ones, that they're actually seeing a diminishing effect of the anxiety or the stress that's there. Okay. As far as the workout itself, what are we looking at here? We're looking at benefits such as, decreases in fatigue. We talked about anxiety and depression, coronary artery disease. That's, again, one of the number one killers that we have in the land. It can decrease the abilities of, possibly obtaining hypertensive reactions. Non-insulin dependent diabetes mellitus. What we're talking about there is type 2 diabetes, cancer, osteoporosis, and obesity. And obesity is still climbing up there in terms of killers. And obesity rates are increasing, and they kind of leveled off a little bit over the last few years, but they're still not declining. So that's a problem. Well, obesity is now becoming is having a large impact now on not just coronary artery disease, but we're talking about higher levels of cancer, and cancer is starting to creep up there in terms of number rates too. So we work out to try to stave off these issues. All right. So what are we looking at here? We're looking at what are some guidelines? Well, really, it just depends on what you're trying to do. The general recommendations for everybody who is in this world, and this is a pretty generalized one, but you're looking at about 150 minutes of about moderate intensity activity. Okay, that is a general guideline from NASM. It's a general guideline from the ACSM. Okay, it's a general guideline from every major organization, and it's showing that we're doing okay with that. All right, but what else do we need? Well, we need 75 minutes per week or more. Obviously, these 150s and these 75s right in this area here, they're or more. Okay, but 75 minutes or more of vigorous intensity activity. All right, and then 3 to 5 days a week, you can have that combination of both. Okay, don't have to be one or the other. It can be a hodgepodge of both, and that's perfectly acceptable because sometimes the body needs a little bit of help in terms of what it's trying to achieve. All right, but again, this is probably going to end up on your test. Is that, well, what are we looking at? 150 minutes per day or more of moderate base, or 75 minutes or more a day for 3 days. Now that's basically 25 minutes a day. 75 minutes per week of vigorous activity, or a combination of both for 3 to 5 days. Okay, pretty straightforward recommendations. So what do we do in terms of guidelines for these workouts? Well, we're looking at a couple of factors here. If you've ever heard of the term the FIT principle, FITT, the big letters here. The E is a little bit more about the psychological component, but the FIT factors here: frequency, intensity, time, type, and then E for enjoyment. Okay, those are all pretty standard across the land in terms of guidelines. But they're there for us to understand better. So what are we talking about with the FIT factors, or with the FIT principle? It's a way to provide a consistency in the programming of your guidelines. So frequency, it's the number of training sessions or the activity sessions that you have in a given time frame. So if you're talking about over the course of a week, frequency would be how many days per week you're doing. The intensity is the level of the demand that's placed on the system. Okay, so what we're talking about there is speed. It could be incline. It could be weight added, like if you're running with a weight vest. Those are all ways that we, ways that we can work inside of intensity. Now, time is how long each session lasts. Pretty straightforward. The type is what you're doing. So what is the mode or activity that you're doing? And then enjoyment, obviously, is the pleasure that you get out of doing something. Okay. So how do we, prescribe intensity? Are a couple of factors here. You may hear METs, MET, or metabolic equivalents, but really what we're talking about, and VO2 obviously is going to be out there as well. But unless you're working in a facility that you can measure VO2, it's going to be a little bit more, a little bit less commonplace. But what usually we work within are the last three pretty significantly. Your heart rate reserve method, which is basically, working within a specific heart rate max. Your ratings of perceived exertion, which is a way that you can rate how hard you're working at one time. And then the talk test is basically saying, hey, how you making out? And if they can talk back to you, they're not working too hard. If they have labored talk, then we know they're working pretty hard. So those are just different ways that we can prescribe intensity. But and then max heart rate method is basically that. I'm sure that's a pretty more common one, was the 220 minus your age. All right, and then from there you take the percentage of what you want to work at and go from there. So let's kind of break everything into a little bit here. Like I said, you're going to be working with the peak heart rate. So there it is. What are you trying to work at? Your target heart rate. It's your heart rate max times 80% of that heart rate max, and that's going to be 220 minus your age, and then you multiply it by 0.8. So you're looking at, let's see, mental math, about 178. Would if you're a 20, if you're a actually, you have to say the age too. So if you're 20 years old, it's 220 minus 20, which gives you 200. And if you want to work at 80%, bam, there you go. You have a 160 that you work at. So your max heart rate theoretically, even though it may not be accurate, is 200 at it being 20 years old. So again, it's one of those things where you kind of have this little equation here, but if your age is 20, all right, and then to determine that heart rate, your THR, you would go initially 220 minus your age, and then that gives you a theoretical heart rate max, all right, and then you would multiply that by the percentage. Just say you wanted it to be 80%, so 0.8 or whatever, or a specific percentage, and then it gives you the working heart rate that you want to. And so there we give our example of 20. It would be 220 minus 20, so it equals 200, and then multiply by 0.8. That's our 80%, gives us 160 heart rate. Okay. Now, if you wanted to work 80 to 85%, then you would multiply by 0.85, and it would be 160 to 170. Okay. So that's just a quick way to kind of do it. It's actually one of the easier ways where you don't have to worry about getting testing results, but testing results are not something that you should shy away from, because then you can work with your VO2 numbers, all right, and by getting a better understanding of that, then you can really understand like how the gas exchange within your system is really working. All right. The heart rate reserve method is a little bit different, because if you look at the equation here, you're actually taking into account this thing right over in here, heart rate rest, or what your resting heart rate is. Okay. And then what you do is you just follow along. Okay. If we again had that 20-year-old, what we're going to do is we're going to get that 200 again, because we know it's 220 minus the age, which is 20. Whoops, can't type here. All right, so there's your 200. But what you're going to then do is subtract your heart rate at rest. All right, and just say that is 60. That's going to give you a heart rate reserve number of 140. But then just say we wanted to work at 80% again, we would go 140, because this is the number here, times 0.8, which gives us 112, because those two numbers times themselves is 112. But then, like it says right here, if you follow my cursor, all right, the heart rate, you're going to add your heart rate and rest back in. So you're going to add back in that 60, and it's going to mean that you're going to work at 172. Okay, that's a little bit different, because what we're doing is taking into account your resting heart rate. Okay, so right then and there, if we know that there's a resting heart rate there, it can change where your 80% is. And me personally, I use this method a little bit more than just 220 minus your age, simply because of the fact that if we know our people's resting heart rate, you're actually taking a physiological number and putting it to use. Okay. So that's the way that you can do that. So if you need to kind of go back and look at, how each one of these equations work, just kind of rewind, try to do it yourself, rewind it again, try to do it yourself, just so you can kind of play around with those numbers a little bit. Or if you have people those numbers for, practice it. Okay. Because you want to get those down. And like I said, because you may not be testing people on a metabolic cart, it may be a little bit different. Again, how can we give intensity again? There's your 6 to 20 scale. That's a rating of perceived exertion. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit so you can see that, but it's called the Borg Scale. And really what we're saying is if a person's at a 6, how this scale works is this 6 really equates to a 6D. All right, so a 6-0. All right, and the reason why is because that means that it's truly the heart rate that they're representative of. So a 6 really is like a 60 on a heart rate scale. A 20 is like a 200. So if you're working, let's just put that out there for you. If you're working at a 200 heart rate, it is maximal exertion, and you're not going to be able to do it for very long, which means you're going to say, I'm at a 20 right now. Okay, so that, but really, what are we saying? People that work anywhere between like 13 and 15, they're working pretty hard. Anybody over 15 is putting out some serious effort. Okay. So if you think about if you have a heart rate monitor on them and you see that they're working at a 120, well, we might, for some people, it may be very difficult, especially if they're new. But if you see a regular person who you have all the time that's been with you for a while in terms of your training, and they seem to kind of just be breezing through everything, it's like, well, maybe we want to bump them up to be able to have them do a little bit more work. Okay, so that's the Borg scale. You kind of know where they're at. Now, there's also a modified version of this. And, if we were to go in to just say, if you were to open up your, if it was, if it wants to open up correctly for me. Whoops, wrong one. My Safari doesn't really want to work right now. Oh, there we go. With Safari, if we look at, just say you say modified Borg scale, you type it in, we can kind of find some images here. And if we scroll through, we can see that they are kind of like, they have 0.5. Sometimes you might see, this is a really good one because it shows side-by-side comparison. If we look, what you're seeing is a 0 means you're not doing anything, but a 10 means everything is very, very hard. So it's almost like working at a 20. So this is a little bit better because that's that 0 to 10 scale versus a 6 to 20 scale. So what we're saying here is that ultimately, you can make a modification to it, and if someone's working at a 5, that means they're working pretty hard. But if they get over to a 7, then we know that it's going to be even harder. And then if you're getting closer, if they say that they're working at a 9, then they really probably can't even tell you that they're working at a 9, because if we go back to our slide here, we know that there's a talk test, and if they're working at a 9, being able to talk back to you is going to be very, very difficult. Doesn't mean that they're dying or they're having health complications. It means, go outside and try to run as fast as you can, and then try to talk while you're doing it. And it becomes very difficult the longer that intensified run goes. Okay. So, what are we saying here? If we look at everything, again, sticking with the heart rate reserve, heart rate max, which we went over both those equations, and then the RPE, you can see how they kind of correlate to each other. Okay, so this is a good chart to kind of keep in the back pocket so you know what's going on. And we talked about the Borg scale. Now, what we're going to get into for the last part of this is the stages that you're going to be working within. And really what we're looking at right here are the 3 different ones that we're going to be working in, the 3 different zones of our stages. All right, so zone 1, see how you work within a 65 to 75, rating of perceived exertion, and then the samples. And then we're going to go from there. So we're going to take each stage and break it down based on the 3 zones that you're going to be working in. Now, making sure that there are 3 stages, but also understand that each, has you have zones 1, 2, and 3. Knowing these numbers is going to be critical, and the types of activities that you can do are going to be critical for you to get these questions right when you take the exam. So here's your stage 1. All right, whoops, a little too far, a little too fast. Okay, stage 1 here. Stage 1, and follow along with the color coordination here, that will really help. Stage 1, you're going to stay pretty much within zone 1 the whole time. Okay, zone 1 we consider the recovery zone once we start moving harder. Okay, so this is what we would consider a little bit more steady rate cardio. All right, what are we working in? 65 to 75% of your heart rate max. And then from there, you're going to go 5 to 10 minute warm up, anywhere between 30 to 60 minutes, staying within that 65 to 75%, and then cool down for 5 to 10 minutes. And that's pretty much a pretty straightforward, simple, easy way to do it. Now, when we get to stage 2, we're going to make a little bit of a jump. Okay? And we're going to make a jump because if we look right here, you're going to stay within, this is where it gets slightly confusing, 65 to 85%. Now, that is because what we're doing is we're going to be jumping back and forth between zone 1 and zone 2. And this is a way to provide us with overload or an increase in workload to then create a little bit more oomph for our people to be able to have this progression to move on to become better athletes within themselves. And that's kind of how I would refer to it. They're not just being a general person, they're still working, so we consider they're an athlete. Okay? And here's how the stage 2 kind of works. I'll blow this up a little bit more. So what we'll do is I'm going to cover up some of the material, but it's basically everything that I'm going to be talking about anyway. So if we look at zones 1 and 2, like it says there, you're going to be working anywhere between 65, as it says right here, follow the cursor, to 85. All right, so here's how it works. Warm up 5 to 10 minutes, getting the body to increase its its heart rate working. Then what you're going to do after that warm up is you're going to go try to work up to 76 to 85% of your zone 2 for 1 minute. After you do that, you're going to back off after that minute and go into 3 minutes of 65 to 75% recovery. Each person is going to be different. It may take that whole minute, may only get them up to about 76 or 77%. And then when they go to their recovery, they might be actually running or jogging pretty closely to the same speed because they're that efficient in their work. All right. Whereas some people during this minute may have to start, basically not really slowing down, but they're going to have to not be able to work as hard to keep at that 76 to 85%. Okay. So it's going to be 1 minute on, 3 minutes basically off. And that 3 minutes is still going to stay within 65 to 75% working. 1 minute, 3 minutes, 1 minute, and then you can go into your cool down of 5 to 10 minutes. Now, if we look at some of the material that's listed though, if we look at some of the information that's provided, you're going to see that you're going to want to go 1-3, 1-3, keep going back and forth. Once you do the 1 minute, you're going to you're going to return to zone 1, okay? And you're going to do that, all right? And then you're going to keep doing that unless, and here's where it gets tricky. Repeat this if the client has time and can recover back into zone 1 range. Pull it back up again. If you look here, if during this 1 minute, you're working at 76 to 85, but during this 3 minutes of recovery to get to 65 to 75%, if they do not recover into the 65 or 75 and they stay in this higher zone here and they can't get below 76%, then what you would do is at the end of that 3 minute recovery, just pull them into a cool down. All right. So, you may not get people who go many stages within stage 2. You might not get a lot of zone back and forths because they can't handle it. As they become better trained and better in their conditioning, they will be able to recover into this and actually very quickly, so they are ready to go and do it into the next 1 minute. And they're going to keep going back and forth. 1-3, 1-3, 1-3. So this just shows you a portion of it. Now, how much time you spend in here is ultimately up to you as the trainer. But if you're looking at doing 30 minutes, understand that 1-3, that's 4 minutes. You're going to have to do seven of these to get 28 minutes. So again, you might not be doing it for that long. All right, you may be doing it for a little bit less than that. Maybe if you did a 15-minute one, that's about 4 rounds. Okay, so that's your call on what your people can do to perform. Okay, now onto stage 3. This is a little bit more, for the advanced client. Okay, there is nothing wrong with that. People are more advanced than others. It just means that they are conditioned to be able to do that. Why? Because they're going to be going max effort into recovery and go from there. So we'll break this out again and we'll blow it up a little bit more. So there's your warm up. Okay, going into that zone 1 through actually getting up to the zone 1 and then moving through zone 1 to zone 2 for a minute, and then a second minute to get you to the higher end of zone 2. And then what you'll then do is go max effort for 1 minute. Max effort meaning 86 to 95%. That's max effort. And then you're going to recover in zone 2. So then you're going to allow your heart rate to drop down as low as 76 to 85%. Back up for a minute, back off for a minute, back up, back off. So you see, it's the same as the previous stage, except you're now moving from zone 3 back to zone 2 to zone 3 back to zone 2. And the same principle occurs here. If you do not recover within the zone 2, 76 to 85%, you cannot move forward to the next round. Okay, now you could And that's ultimately up to you as a trainer because it depends on what you're trying to do. To say you can't move is wrong. But to say that, are you trying to use these stage trainings effectively? Then it depends on what you're trying to achieve. So if they don't get back to that 76 to 85%, it does not mean that they can't go to the next round. It just means that they're not fully recovered or recovered, not fully, because they're not going to be fully recovered. They will not be able to get to that point, and that becomes a problem. Okay, so we have to be very consistent on what we're trying to do for our people. Okay, so what is the importance here? It's just taking into account different intensities. By going, just say you go into stage 2 or stage 3, we have these higher workloads, meaning that you're going to potentially, basically burn more calories. You're going to use more fuels. Okay, and by doing that, it allows the body to basically adapt to harder workloads, meaning that you're going to provide them more intensity when they're ready to handle it. Okay, so you're also, like it says here, when you get up into the stage 3 training, what you can do is you can take greater advantage of what we call EPOC, or excess post excess P post oxygen consumption. Excess post exercise oxygen consumption, meaning that when you're done with this workout session, you're going to have a longer EPOC, which means that you're going to have to use more oxygen later on, after the workout is already over, to continue to burn more calories and still use oxygen to help you with the recovery. Now, you might hear, if you go to an Orange Theory Fitness or you go to work for Orange Theory, they talk about afterburn and all this other stuff. Really what it is the true physiological name that we talk about is EPOC, excess post-exercise oxygen consumption. And it's basically the continuous calorie burn that a body has because it's trying to get back to a recovered state, because you have a fast and a slow component of your recovery within that EPOC. Fast meaning within the first 60 seconds post training, and the slow component meaning that it's a slow recovery, meaning up to 24 hours post training, that you can have a higher than normal metabolic rate at that point. Okay, so we're talking about adaptation. We're talking about working harder, giving people a way to advance throughout their training. All right, so that's the stage training. That's NASM's specialty. That's their modality. That's what they really want you to focus in on. Now, me personally, I think it's great because it's just different mechanisms for you to work really, really hard. Now, if we look at stage 3, someone here might be, in this 1 minute, they might be running at 12 miles an hour or higher. And then when they come down to their 1 minute recovery, they might be walking at 3 minutes because they're working so hard. Another person might be running at 6 minutes or biking at 20 miles per hour, whatever it may be. But when they recover, it may be slower than they think. So it becomes, the challenge is faced on them. All right. So that's, in essence, if you look at stage 3, this is truly the, what everybody considers HIIT, or high intensity interval training. And again, that's another word that kind of gets driven around a lot, that really is just, it's intervals of work to rest ratios. And that's what we're doing here. Another way is circuit training, and circuit training basically being a little bit more like truly a one workout to one exercise to another continuously until you are ready to at a specific time end that portion of it and then rest and then do it again, or end that session and then move on to something different. So circuit training really is you're able to spend more time moving through things and then having a rest period and then doing it again. So if you see, just depending upon the stabilization, strength, or power component that you're in, you can see where you can do, you would go, just say you're in the strength, you'd go dumbbell chest press for a number of reps, move right into the cable rows, move into a seated dumbbell overhead press, to a standing barbell curl, to a machine tricep push down, to then a multiplanar lunge. And you would go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then rest for whatever the resting period of time is. I mean, really, it could be anything from, depending upon how conditioned a person is, 1 minute to 5 minutes. So we're trying to get some recovery in there to then do it again. Now, if you look here, though, let's take a look here. This is where it gets tricky because you have to make sure the equipment is close and it's all there for you. So you'd have a dumbbell, a machine, another dumbbell, a barbell, another machine, and then lunging, which is body weight. Okay, so you can see where you're going to be moving around a lot. Well, what that means is that as soon as you're done with one motion, as soon as you're done with the dumbbells, you would immediately find your cable row machine and go to it. So your rest period inside of the workout, okay, inside of the workout would be moving from whatever exercise you're doing to the next one. And then at the end, this resting here is going to be your longer one to be able to get you to recover to then do it again. All right, so that's how that would work. Okay, so again, we're looking at EPOC again, where it's going to help you with that post-exercise effect. All right, the cool thing about circuit training is, like it says here, near identical caloric expenditure, meaning that you can do more in a shorter period of time by doing this versus walking or jogging. You could take a 30-minute or less circuit training and have the same caloric expenditure that you could from potentially a 60-minute walk. So that's why it's really important to not not question the circuit training, and say that it's not going to help you, because ultimately what you're doing is you're almost kind of like this with just shorter spans in between them. You got to figure your zone 3 work might actually only be like 15 seconds, but your rest period to go from exercise 1 to exercise 2 right here might only be like 10 seconds. So it's a very good work to rest ratio, and it helps you with that post caloric burn. All right. So, these are just ways that you can, worry about doing this type of stuff here. 5 to 10, this is a way that you can use circuit training with actually cardio with it as well. So if you look here, you can see there's your warm up, 5 to 10 minute warm up, moving right into a stage 1, 5 to 10 minutes. So again, if we go back really quickly, stage 1, right here, you're going to do recovery based or 65 to 75% of your heart rate. Okay, and you stay in that more of a steady rate exercise. Moving from there, and this is a stabilization person, moving into a 15 to 20 minute circuit training, back to 5 minutes of stage 1 cardio, and then cooling down 5 to 10 minutes. So pretty different, okay? A strength person might do a 5 to 10 minute warm up, a 5 to 10 minute, stage 2. So you're going 1 minute. So if we go back just so you can see it, and just so you have the visual, you're going to go 1 minute 3, 1 minute 3 for 5 to 10 minutes. So you might get a couple of bouts in there, all right, which could be interesting for an effect. And then you do 15 to 20 minutes of circuit training, back to stage 2, and then your cool down. Okay, so you can see where they're vastly different because, your circuit training here is stage 1 cardio. Your circuit training here is stage 2. So you can see where as a person progresses in their level, and whether it be stabilization, strength, or power, they're going to change what they're going to do. So for a power level, you might have the warm-up, stage 3, circuit training, stage 3, and then a cool down. Now that's going to really wipe you out because the power is so explosive and you're going all out effort here that it's going to be very, very challenging. All right, and there it is right there. Actually, I didn't think it was there, but it is. And you can see there's your stage 3, circuit training, then actually what they'll have you do is to help you with the cool down component, you'll go to stage 2 because you've been very exhaustive throughout these 2 right here. Okay? And then back into your 5 to 10 minutes of cool down. So these are all different ways that we can work within. You can make them your own. You can do, getting wild and crazy is not always the best. Sometimes sticking with the basics can be very influential and very positive. So just remember that it can always be implemented, but making sure that the backbone to why you're doing it is everything that we just talked about in here. So you have to be able to understand that that's the way that it should work and progress through, because if not, then what you're going to do is you could potentially be setting your people up for injury, having some sort of episode or a cardiac event. So you got to stay within those backbones because that's ultimately what we're looking for. All right. So that's the end here. I'm super glad I got through this without having bronchitis and coughing up a storm. So please feel free to leave questions or comments in the in the comment section here. And then I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to this. And I hope that it helps you as you progress forward in trying to get that CPT certification. The exam itself is pretty tough. So don't question or second guess yourself on these slides that we went through. Take time, go back, listen to what we had to say. If you're seeing some terminology that I'm throwing out there, like I said, ask a question and we'll try to help you as best as possible. So go through this slide by slide, take it easy, and then, like I said, good luck on the future testing that you're going to be doing for this. Have a great day.